Let's wait for some people to come in here, and then we will be getting into the topic of the day. Got a little bit of time right now, so I said let's talk about this because I think this is something that there's a lot of misconceptions out there about. And then, of course, as always, I'll answer your questions and you know any of that other kind of stuff. I'm always willing to go off on a tangent, and when we're talking dogs and dog training. So we'll just wait for people to roll in here. I have not announced this live. I didn't even know if I was going to do a live today. We just had a little bit of time, and I said, hey, why not? Let's do a live. So get my tea going, and we can have a nice little talk about working dogs and modern dog training. Is it really good for working dogs or not? Hey guys, how you doing? Nice to see you all in here. We'll just wait for a couple more people to join, then I'll get started. I guess I'm just going to leave this up anyways. Yeah, I will save this live. I didn't save the last live. Well, I'm not going to get into why I didn't save the last live. It had nothing to do with anything that happened on stream. Um, but there was a reason I couldn't save the last one. So I'm going to save this one though, and we'll go from there. And as usual, elite members, I will happily answer any questions. Hey, how you doing? Argentina. Nice to see you. I'm gonna get my water boiling, get my tea going, and then we're gonna get after it. So, we're gonna be talking today about and what inspired this topic for me was I saw this discussion actually on one of the I and this is a discussion that's happened before, right? Um, this discussion about is modern training, modern methodologies in dog training, is it better for working dogs as a whole? And I saw this on the IGP, the international IPO page on Facebook. So some of you maybe you're on there and you saw the topic as well. But I think it's a topic worth discussing because as someone that trains working dogs and breeds working dogs, this is a topic that's near and dear to my heart. So, of course, I have opinions on the topic and I have my thoughts on the topic and I have direct experience with the topic. So, let me get started. Let's talk a little bit about this. So, first off, when we're speaking about modern training, let's be really clear. Modern training is like in the old days, it was all kind of yank and crank and compulsion based training exclusively. And, many people never used food or toy rewards, and it was all do it because I said you have to do it. And this is how working dogs were trained in the past, and still how some are trained currently. Um, but now in sport competition, especially IGP, if you train like this, you will not be successful in any capacity. The dogs won't look good. You will never have high success in the high levels and so on and so forth. So, training has in the last 20, 30 years, probably 20 years, training has trained changed so radically. And a lot of the training that we actually do and the training in the competition field has impacted training everywhere, right? So even the working canines, like the police canines and stuff like this, all the training that you see with those dogs as well is influenced by the sport field, right? The innovation happens on the sport field. So that's what you have to understand is the cutting edge training for the most part happens on the sport field, and then it kind of goes into everything else, the pet training and so on and so forth. And you know, I love the competition training. Quick plug for me, the shieldk9.ca. If you go on our online courses, I've started releasing some courses for competition obedience training because I train it completely differently than how I do the pet dogs, how I do even like service dogs, like dogs that have like a real job, whether it's a police dog or a service dog or something like this. The way I train the obedience is completely different because it's an obedience that's very stylistic. It's an obedience where you're getting pointed on, the precision and the power and the appearance of the dog, not so much just whether or not the dog will do it, right? So everybody wants faster, more precise, more powerful. It's that kind of game, right? So you need to have a very open, happy, active, and precise dog. And of course, the things that we do to achieve this are very modern training, right? And it doesn't mean that there's no compulsion for sure. Actually, there is compulsion involved, but the compulsion is very artistically applied, and it only enhances what the positive rewards are bringing in the dog. It actually creates more power when done properly. But I'm not going to get into all the technicalities of that because we'll be here all day. But, anyways, the question was, does positive does the modern training, all the modern stuff that we do, has it made working dogs better? And from a breeding standpoint, I have an opinion on this, right? Because I'm also breeding dogs. And when we're breeding dogs, it's different than when you're training dogs. When you're training dogs, you have the dog, it is what it is, and you're trying to bring out the most that you can bring out in the dog. When you are breeding dogs, you're looking for the best genetic product, and you're looking to put it with other top tier genetic products in order to produce a very high quality genetic product in the puppies, right? So of course I'm breeding for work, so I'm looking for qualities that are conducive to that. We want drive, we want confidence, we want resilience, so on and so forth, right? Things that are really important for the dogs that we are breeding here, right? We're breeding working line German Shepherds for the most part. Yes, I do some herders as well. Um, but these are dogs that must be capable of work, right? They must not just be dogs that look pretty or dogs that are just friendly or nice pets. These are dogs that actually need to do something for a living, okay? So it's really, really important that for a dog that's able to, whether it's find drugs, track somebody down, fight a grown man that's under the influence of drugs, and try, protect his family. These are things where you require a dog that has a lot of different qualities, right? And I'm not going to get into all the specific things that we look for. I'm going to talk about something very specific though that I've noticed that you really can't do without in the breed and in the working dogs in general. And that is resilience, and that is hardness. Okay? So when we speak about resilience and hardness, what we're talking about is we're talking about a dog that can go through something unpleasant, that can have an unpleasant experience, whether it's an external experience or it's an experience that's internal, right? And the dog can function past that experience. If you've trained dogs, if you've worked dogs in any capacity, you've all met the dogs and also the human beings, which every little thing, right? Or maybe it's not even a little thing. Maybe it's something that's a little bit more significant, something that was a little bit traumatic or difficult, just completely destroys the dog. The dog turns into a puddle of jello, and like I said, some people as well, right? Just completely destroys the world. They're just done. You know what I mean? Complete shut down. Like, just there's not much left after that, right? And then there are the dogs and the people as well, right? Who they can go through things that are actually really difficult, right? Physically difficult, mentally difficult, and they can come out the other end and still be operational. They can still be ready to go. And in dogs, this is certainly a genetic trait. Okay. And that's something that I have found. Now, part of the selection process for this used to be the training. Okay. So if you would see a dog in competition, especially with certain trainers, now listen, that's still the case. There are some trainers in IGP where if you see a dog competing on the field with that, where you see the dog competing with that trainer on the field, you're like, oh, that's a dog, man. He went through that. He went through that level of pressure and that type of training, and he's still on the field and he still looks like that. That's a dog, right? But in today's day and age with the modern training, there's a huge push, especially with the ban on certain training devices and training methodologies, right? Where uh, they're pushing more and more towards the border collie type dogs, right? So border collies generally the way that we look at resilience, the way that we measure it, border collies tend not to be resilient in that way. They don't tend to have a lot of, they're resilient maybe in their specific job, but generally, like when I'm speaking about, um, like when, especially resilient towards the handler, right? Or resilient towards something very unexpected or difficult happening. They're very sensitive dogs, right? And the reason why they're sensitive is because it enables them to be very controllable, right? So even though they're dogs that have high drive, right? They also tend to not be very resilient because they're what we would call very soft dogs, right? Because in the jobs that they do, typically people don't tend to use a lot of tools in the training. I know they do sometimes, but they don't use the tools in the training, and they need dogs to be very um, sensitive to verbal pressure, right? So they need dogs that are very pressure sensitive. Now, maybe in a herding dog, that's okay. But um, when we're talking about a working dog, especially doing the tasks that I just mentioned, right? Fighting somebody that's on, meth, tracking somebody down, through difficult conditions, dealing with combat situations, stuff like this, actually, protecting the handler from a real threat, you know, for example, I talked about it before. I had a dog who last year he fought a bear off. One of our dogs, he fought a bear off, right? So it's one of those things where the level of resilience and hardness that we look for in a working dog, especially a general purpose working dogs like the tasks that I just described, you cannot have a very sensitive dog in those tasks. Because if you have an uber sensitive dog in those tasks, it's going to run into problems. There's going to be things that happen that are going to shut the dog down, that are going to create a softness. Now, here's the problem that people don't know. Unless you really work these dogs and train these dogs, those types of dogs, and I call them, again, it's a generalization, right? There's border collies, I'm sure, that are pretty tough. In fact, I have run into a few of them. But like, I'm using this as a generalization because that's all we can speak about when we speak about topics like this. There are dogs. There's a big push now for a lot of these very soft dogs that don't really need that they have a lot of drive and desire, but they're very soft and sensitive dogs. And what that allows is it allows them to be good on the sport field, right? So with a skilled trainer, you don't need to put a lot of pressure on that dog to get a very nice, kind of crackerjack performance out of that dog. Here's the problem. Those dogs, because they're so handler focused, they're so sensitive to the handler, they lack, also the side effect of that is they lack resilience, right? And it's a problem, and if you breed on that too many times, you end up with dogs that are very soft and basically fall apart all the time. And that's the problem, and that's a huge problem. So in the old days, part of the test for the dogs was not just what they could do on the field, it was if they could get through the training process. And the training process involved, like I said, uh, tons and tons of compulsion, right? If you go back and watch the old videos of Schutzhund in the 90s, and pretty much any bite sport in the 90s, right? You saw a very different picture than what you see today, right? But part of it is also, and I'm not saying the dogs of yesteryear were better. I don't think actually that they were, but I think that now, we kind of maybe within the last 10 years really started to reach a peak when it came to the working dogs. But now with all the crazy new rules, that are coming into play in Europe and so on and so forth, there's going to be less and less. The dogs are going to peak, and now they're going to go more towards the border collie side of things. For a general purpose dog, this is not good. Now, of course, we have to take into consideration that probably soon in many places, general purpose police dogs will no longer be used. And I think, it's not unfounded to say that within the next 20 years, I wouldn't be surprised if the only thing allowed in the future is only single purpose detection dogs because of all the, political nonsense that's going on. But for me as a breeder, I always want to be able to preserve and have access to dogs that have hardness and resilience. So, I'm going to give you guys an example from my training program. Okay, so I don't just do competition training. For competition training, I'm only interested in working with the dog that I have in front of me and maximizing that dog to make them look as powerful, as fast, as precise, whatever, whatever. I'm not there to prove a point about genetics. I'm there to try and do my very best to maximize performance on the field. But I also run a personal protection dog training program. You know, we train dogs, whether it's from outside or our own dogs and puppies that we've imported or produced here. And we train these dogs for people to go and be their personal security dogs. Okay? Now, in many cases, when we start with these dogs, especially when we're getting green dogs from Europe and so on and so forth, the dogs often are coming to us at a year, maybe a year and a half, and they're very active and they're very high drive. They don't have a lot of inhibition, and they're generally hooligans. Okay? And a big part of what we do is we are using more old school training to bring the dogs down because we don't want super active, you know, sport like obedience for regular life. That obedience is fine on the competition field. It is not at all functional in the real world, and it's not something that the average person, especially many of our clients are not experienced dog handlers, it's not something the average person can handle, right? So the big thing that we do with these high drive dogs is we bring them down a bit in the obedience. Hey, calm down. Just be calm, be compliant, relax. Yes, I know there's somebody kicking a soccer ball over there. Don't try to go and eat the person in the soccer ball. Relax. Let's get these dogs calm, compliant. And about 98% of these dogs, no problem. The training brings them down to a manageable level. They're calm, compliant, easy to be around, easy to live with, so on and so forth. But every once in a while, there is a dog that no matter how much pressure we put on him, he becomes more and more and more. Because, of course, we're not just using pressure, we're also, rewarding the dog, right? There is every once in a while the dog that the pressure is just like you're pouring gasoline on a fire. Don't get me wrong. A lot of people, think that they have that dog. Really, what it is they're just half-assing in the training. A little nagging corrections and half-ass kind of stuff, and it just kind of creates what we call the paper tiger. Oh, he's so badass, and it's like, yeah, give him to a real handler, and the handler gives him a solid correction, and all that nonsense is over with. No, I'm talking about real pressure in the training, real, inhibition in the training. And with a very small percentage of dogs, you see that the dog becomes more. So the last dog that I saw that with was a dog named Boss from our breeding program. I think I put some videos of him up here and there. He was a 1-year-old dog. And this is a dog where we said, okay, man, you got to calm down a little bit too active, a little bit too powerful, right? This puppy was out of Glitzy and Onyx. He came back to us at a year from the handlers. They hadn't done much of anything with him due to COVID, and they had us train him as a level 3 protection dog. Anyways, this dog, he was so active in the obedience, he was active in the protection, and we worked really, really hard to bring him down. And we just couldn't quite bring him down. He stayed active, right? And it was more of an old school type training because, like I said already, we explained why we need to do that type of training for those dogs, right? And he stayed active, he stayed powerful the whole time. There was nothing we threw at that dog that was different, or sorry, anytime we threw that a new picture at that dog that was a little bit different, he just responded to it, no problem. He just took it in and just stayed operational the entire time. That is very rare, and it's becoming rarer, I think, especially as we're going to be pushing more towards sensitive dogs that are very kind of handler sensitive, and just unfortunately handler sensitive and general sensitivity are not very far apart. So the more you push into the handler sensitivity, right? Oh, I want a dog who's King Kong, but he's super handler sensitive. That's very, very rare. And in my experience, usually if you keep breeding on that, dogs that are sensitive, you breed to another dog that's sensitive, you just end up with little balls of mush, right? You need that hardness, you need that resilience, especially if you want a general purpose dog or a real protection dog. You need a dog that has that to some degree or other, especially in the breeding stock. Because when you're breeding the dogs, it's so important that you're breeding on dogs that have an excessive amount of the trait that you're after, because breeding, like I said, is generally a downhill slope. Okay, so it's really important, to recognize that trait. And unfortunately, in my opinion, right, with a lot of the more modern training, you won't see that. You'll actually kind of forget. I mean, look, I've been training my dog Gage, let's say, for what is it, 2 years now? I've been training that dog. That dog eats e-collar like it's candy, but he's not a hard dog. He's not a soft dog, but he's not a hard dog. Okay, he's not like the kind of the 2% type of dog that I was describing earlier, right? That other puppy from my program that lives with a family is right. Gage is just not that dog. He just does. But I've conditioned him, and I've worked so much with him that he can appear to be that dog to a lot of people. Oh, look, Has just gave him 200 on the e-collar, and he's super active, and his teeth are out, and he's working his ass off, and he's like crazy. Yeah, but that's a picture that we worked to build over many, many, um, months, many, many training sessions. That's not necessarily the full natural behavior of the dog. Yes, some genetics are involved, but that's not the full natural behavior of the dog. And that's something that people have to keep in mind. So when we're breeding dogs, you have to remember you don't breed on training. You're breeding on genetics. And when the training stops being part of the process by which we disqualify dogs from the breeding programs, I think it becomes a problem. And I think people can easily become deluded. I've seen a lot of people, they watch a dog work. Oh, wow, look how drive he is. I say, look, he's a happy dog, but he's not a drivey dog. He's happy to work with his handler. He has a good relationship with his handler. But if you know what you're looking for and you look at that dog, you would say, medium drive, not very high drive, right? But oh, look how happy he is. Yeah, he's happy. He's happy. The handler has made very good work with the dog, but that's not a dog that's in drive, and that's not a dog that's working through adversity and still looking like that. So that's my little opinion and my experience on the topic. And I wanted to do a little video on this because I think it's a very interesting topic, and I don't think enough people really talk about it. And like I said, I kind of have experience on both sides with the more kind of compulsion based training, with training where we're not trying to create tons of drive in the dog, we're actually trying to calm the dog down, versus the more modern training where we're trying to make the dog look as active and drivey and powerful and fast as possible. Those are two very different things. So when a dog can still look active, drivey, fast in the other form of training, then you know he's something special. Okay, guys. Let's see what we got here. In Australia, the Queensland state government has banned prong collars. Yeah, I'm not surprised. It's going to be coming more and more and more. You have to be aware of that. I just purchased Off Leash Obedience. I'm in Australia. Well, hopefully you're not in Queensland, my friend. Well, maybe they didn't ban e-collars. I don't know. But either way, look, guys. I mean, look, when you're in a place like that, with all these crazy restrictive rules and that type of stuff, you need to take the steps appropriate to ensure that you have the devices that you need in order to properly train your dog. And that's all I'll say on that topic. Best training for a German Shepherd puppy to start with. These questions are like, best training for a German Shepherd puppy to start with. What do you? Well, I happen to have this wonderful course for puppy training. You may find that useful. Otherwise, go on YouTube. There's tons of free content on my channel and other channels, things that you can do. Why does my dog behave way better to my commands when she's in an overwhelming environment? Because your security, right? The security provides the security that your commands, that she knows, helps her deal with the overstimulation that she's receiving from the environment. What is the main difference from your point of view among old and new training? Well, I kind of already went into that
And the clicker is nothing new. The clicker's been around for 20, 30 years. I know every time positive only trainers crop up, they like to pretend like they've got this brand new science that they just came out. And it's been around, guys. It's been around. They've been training dolphins and whales for 30 years. A clicker is simply a bridge. That's all it is, right? So people like to get, people are very, gimmicky. They, oh, there's a clicker. It must be special. A clicker is just, it's just creating a sound, right? It's what you do with the sound. You can do the same thing with your voice. Um, you know, in the old days, many handlers for sure used bridges, whether they said yes or something to the dog, right? But really, in the old days, the fundamental difference was that people didn't spend as much time, usually, I'm speaking in generalities, shaping behaviors, and people used a lot more compulsion a lot earlier on, and usually in a much higher level of intensity to create or reinforce behaviors. So it usually created a bit of a much more conflicted picture in the dog. And you see many of the dogs of old, dogs actually that have had many breedings, and influence all the dogs of today, the way that they're doing their obedience. If you watch like dogs from the 90s and stuff, you're like, oh my God, this dog looks like he was beaten with a 2x4. And in some cases, I'm sure he was. Would my training work well for a service dog prospect? Yes. And all my off leash training is the same training. So the training I give for pets is the same obedience training I do on my protection dogs. It's the same obedience training I've done on police dogs, and so on and so forth. It's the same. What do you need a dog to do? You need a dog to sit down, come when he's called, stay, go to his bed, be able to ignore distractions, heel, right? These are all fundamental behaviors, whether you have a pet dog or a service dog, um, where you need where you need this complete level of control, right? So fancy behaviors, like dumbbell retrieves and stuff like this, is not so important for the working dog or the service dog, or well, I guess for service dogs you do want retrieves sometimes, if you're mobility impaired and you want the dog to pick something up for you, but you wouldn't train it like we train the dumbbell retrieve anyways, right? You want more functional behavior, so on and so forth. What do I think about positive only dog trainers? I've got videos on that, my friend. Why does you? Okay. Hey, Has, my dog comes on recall from stay every time, but he doesn't want to come when he's sniffing and searching. That actually brings me to one of the most common issues I see when people are training the recall is they put the dog in a sit stay or a down stay. That is not a recall. That does not reflect real life. Real life is when your dog is just wandering around, experiencing the world as he normally would, and you call your dog from that behavior. And in many cases, you'll see the dog that will do the recall from the stay, but cannot do the recall from, as you described, smelling and just kind of doing the things that a dog would do. And that is because now you have put your dog between, in a situation where he's enjoying a competing motivator. The act of smelling is rewarding for him. The act of looking at something, or taking in, I don't know, looking at another dog, smelling pee on the fire hydrant, whatever it is, that's enjoyable for him. And now you're competing with that motivation. This is why positive training doesn't work, my friend, right? Because now you're competing with that motivation, and you're saying, hey man, come pick me, pick daddy. Daddy's got the liver treats. And he says, I got the treats every day, my friend. I don't need it. You know what? This thing that I'm smelling right now, this is more interesting to me than your liver treats, right? Or whatever it is that you've got. And that's the problem is with the positive training. If your only game is motivation, eventually you're going to run into a competing motivator, and that competing motivator is going to outcompete your motivation, and then your recall is shit, right? So you need to train the recalls properly, the way that we train them, or I'm sure you can find somebody else who trains them maybe a slightly different way, but there needs to be an element of obligation in your recalls. When there's an element of obligation in your recalls, it doesn't matter how much he enjoys the competing motivator, he's still going to say, you know what, daddy's calling me, I gotta come. Think of it as money, okay? I love to use this one because everybody understands money. I'm going to put $500 across the room over there, okay? So there's going to be $500 over there, all right? And I'm going to have $5 in my hand, all right? So we've got 500 across the room and $5 in my hand. and I'm going to put you in the middle of the room, and I'm going to say, look, man, you can either go get that $500 or you can take the $5 that I have here. And you'll say, no problem, man. Forget your $5. I'm going to go get that $500. At least I hope you would. If you had half a brain, you would, right? And it's the same as with your dog. You're putting yourself, and most people, the thing that they're working with, it's a very like kind of mediocre to low level of motivation for the dog. He says, I get that all the time. $5? Who cares? Right? There's $500 over there. I'm going to get that $500. I don't know when the next time I'm going to have a chance to get $500 is. And off he goes, and you're left holding your $5. Oh, I don't know why my puppy won't come. Okay. Let's see what else we got going on here. Do I recommend putting on a backup clip on the prong? I've never done this backup clip with the prong collar. I always use Herm Sprangers, and I've never really had a Spranger collar come apart on me. I'm not saying it's impossible, but I never have, right? I know with the shitty Chinese knockoff versions, for sure they come apart. Um, but yeah, opinion on the Kohler method? Well, the Kohler method is interesting because not that, it's what they're at the time, I guess it was revolutionary, but we're still talking about the Kohler method, right? And when did he write that book? I think he wrote it in the 80s, and we're still talking about it. I think that says all you need to say, right? Now, you know, maybe I'm going to write a book, and maybe it'll be the next Kohler method, but not the Kohler method. I actually read a little bit of his book, I think many years ago, and it was very basic stuff that we all already know now. But for sure, like he was at the time a game changer, and people will probably always remember his name in relation to dog training. But for sure, there's much better ways now. You don't need to just do that. Like it was a more old school way. We update everything as we go along. In some cases, the updates aren't good, and in other cases, the updates, for sure, improve upon it. I have no problem with the use of compulsion. If you know me, I have no problem with the use of compulsion in training, but it should be balanced. It should be balanced compulsion, and it should be compulsion that makes sense to the dog. My problem with the Cooler method is that if you don't know what you're doing, you can suppress a dog pretty quickly unnecessarily with some of that stuff. Um, so, just as with positive reinforcement, when you're applying pressure, there's an artistic and intelligent way to do it, and then you can do it like an idiot and, cause problems. So, yeah, let's see what else we go here. Yeah, if you don't train at home, you can train. So my dog is 6 months. I've stopped training at home and only train whilst walking off leash. Well, it depends what you mean by off-leash training. If your dog's loose and you have no ability to control your dog outside of bribing your dog with food, then for sure you must stop that. But if you're, training in the proper way off-leash, then, yeah, you can still train at home, of course. What do I think are the top three online trainers at the moment apart from me? What is an online dog trainer, right? Like, I'm not an online dog trainer. I'm a real life dog trainer that puts some of what I do online, right? Like I'm as real as a heart attack. Now I do know that there are some dog trainers that are like basically only YouTube dog trainers, and that's fine. But I don't really know anything about them. I don't comment on trainers unless I've met them in person. You know, that's my big thing. Or if I've had some sort of interaction with them, either by proxy or something like that. I don't really like comment on what other people do because I don't know, right? To be honest, um, you know, I'll talk about some of the people I've watched online, in the past, so on and so forth. I've watched Bart Bellon. I find him a very interesting dog trainer online. Um, who else have I watched? I watched Ivan Balbanov. I find him quite an interesting trainer as well. Online, I don't know. I don't know anybody else that really you know, kind of. I always click when I see their stuff, so to speak. Um, Yeah, I can't think of anybody else right now that I'm like watching them all the time. You know what I mean? Um, I'm sure I'm missing somebody. What behaviors do you look for hunting? For hunt drive, we want dogs that. Oh, for a hunting dog, I don't do hunting dogs, so I can't speak to what I look for because I don't train hunting dogs. I always laugh when positive only people think their cookies will be more satisfying to have than a juicy rabbit. Yep. Well, there's always hope, right? I know trainers in Belgium and France who use cattle prods or use whips as part of their training. Some still do. There must be a line that you can't cross to prove if a dog is strong enough. That's not the purpose of training. The purpose of training is not to prove if a dog is strong or not. The purpose of training is to create and reinforce a behavior. Now, it so happens that in maybe some more old school types of training, a dog just simply could not get through the system and be able to perform the desired behaviors afterwards. Now, for some of the things that I do in training, when I'm training only my personal dogs, there are things that I can tell relatively quickly if I've taken a dog on and I say, okay, this is going to be my next competition dog. When I'm training the dog, I can see, hey, he doesn't have the resilience. He has too much, he doesn't have the resilience to get through the training. Because in my training, if you guys have watched me train with Gage, so on and so forth, the dog needs to have a lot of drive, but the dog also needs to be able to handle some pressure. And if he can't handle pressure, come through the pressure to access the drive satisfaction, for me, it's not a dog that I want to keep, right? Um, but it's not about proving anything. The training isn't about proving anything. The training is about creating something. But of course, if you have a training that's more, if you demand a lot in your training, then you're going to see more of what the dog is and is not. What is the best way to gain experience? And by the way, in France and Belgium and all these places where now they're banning devices, training devices, and training is going back underground, they're going back to the old ways. Believe me, e-collars were actually a very humane improvement for a lot of dog trainers compared to the stuff they used to do. What is the best way to gain experience to be a future trainer? I'm already an elite member, and I know being a dog walker is not going to help me. You need to get leash time. That's what you need to do. You need to get your hand on some dogs. You need to train some dogs to a standard that is, you know, obvious for anybody that sees the dog that has been trained. That's what you need to do. Leash time. That's everything. What do you think about old school dog trainers who rarely use treats and rewards and mostly use corrections and body pressure? If you know what you're doing, for sure it can work. Why not use both? It goes without saying. I have no opposition to using food. I have no opposition to using toys. In fact, I use them both a lot. I use both. I can be very positive, or I can apply compulsion as necessary or pressure as necessary on the dog. There's nothing wrong with using both. That's real life. Let's see here. Michael Ellis. Yeah, you know what? When I was a new dog trainer, I watched a lot of Michael Ellis. I found him uh, very interesting. I guess I should have mentioned him for sure. Have I ever competed in PSA? No. It looks interesting. Um, it looks interesting. I don't have the time for it right now with IGP. Larry Crone too. Yeah, for sure. Larry's a good guy. I remember Larry from the Working Dog. The first time I ran into Larry was on the Working Dog forum back in the old days, man, before we had like all the Facebook and stuff. And I liked his stuff then, and I've still seen some of his stuff, and I liked his stuff, and for sure, I find his stuff interesting as well. I think he's a good dude. Um, I consistently do strong corrections on prong collar, grabbing my dog's scruff when she jumps on people, but she still does this bad behavior. Any thoughts? Yeah, I have a thought. My thought is this. If your goal is to punish, right? If your goal is to punish a behavior that you deem to be undesirable, what is a punishment? A punishment is an aversive experience that you're applying to a specific behavioral contingency within the dog's behavioral pattern. Okay? Now, in order for it to be a punishment, you don't get to decide. You're saying, Has, I used the prong collar and I scruffed my dog and this and that and everything else, and my dog's still doing it. Did you punish your dog? I don't think so. Doesn't sound like you did, because punishment creates a reduction or, over time, if applied properly, a complete extinction within that specific behavioral contingency. And this is one thing I stress to all my clients. You don't get to decide if you rewarded your dog. You don't get to decide if you punish your dog. You may have an intention. Hey, I'm giving him a hot dog. My intention is to give him positive reinforcement. Oh, crap, I gave him a hot dog. He doesn't like hot dogs. Well, guess what? He's not eating the hot dog. I didn't positively reinforce him regardless of my intention. It's the same thing, and I see this a lot with punishment. People intend to punish a behavior, and they deliver a punishment, and the dog basically just kind of shakes it off like nothing even happened and goes on about their day. Even if they stop in the moment, I always look at the behavior of the dog after the correction. What's the behavior like after the correction? Do I see a suppression in the behavior? Is there a suppression in the dog? No? Well, then you didn't punish your dog, really. Again, think about it from a money side of things, okay? And this is what I like. Again, we'll use money, okay? Let's say there's that $500 at the other end of the room, okay? And I'm standing in the middle of the room now, and you're at the opposite end here, and you want to get to that $500. Let's say for your dog, jumping on people is obviously $500, okay? And you're there, and you've got $200. You've got a big sign. You say, you do this, I'm charging you $200. And what are you going to say? Of course. Oh, well, I'll still have three at the end. There's $500 over there. The fine is only $200 to get across the room to that $500, right? So I want you to think of your correction as like the $200, right? I hope people are putting this together here, right? So the behavior is $500. The correction is $200. The dog still walks away with $300. Think of it like that. You need to start upping your fine a little bit. Guys, you gotta stop asking me about people online. I'm not commenting on these people because I don't know them. So, yeah. All right, guys. Looks like we ran through and I kind of went over that little topic I wanted to talk about. There's a reason cattle stay behind an electric fence and the fence doesn't tickle them. That's for sure. Very true. All right, guys. It was nice talking to all of you. Good comments. Sorry if I missed your questions. I just wanted this one to be a quick one. Well, it was 42 minutes. It wasn't bad. Nice to talk to all of you. Check out our online training, shieldk9.ca. Hopefully I see you all on the next one. Thanks for checking in, boys. Or guys, I should say.